My name is Gil. I'm Israeli. I'm doing study in Portsmouth University in the UK. I'm exploring the process of poetry making, the process of inspiration that visionary poets feel or experience before they actually write. So once the poet physically writes the poem on a paper, that's when my thesis stops. I'm not interested in the so-called product. I'm interested in taking one step back and asking, what is this inspiration? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to visualize that experience, that visionary experience of the poet, through making films. I'm actually making films which give shape, color, and text to that experiences, drawing on my own personal experience. So I'm trained graphic designer for my BA, and I'm also a poet. So I'm documenting through film my own experiences. And my core argument, the reason that I'm doing this PhD is because I argue that visionary poets, they don't imagine reality. They don't turn reality into magic, but they turn magic into reality. So I argue that visionary poetry, they don't imagine, they don't idealize, but they actually do see the magic which is in reality, and they bring it down. The purpose of my research is self-exploration and outlining and visualizing that creative process of poetry. So I'm trying to understand what are the methods by which the poet sees the beauty of life. When I say visionary poet, visionary poetry means poetic experiences when you go down the street and suddenly something makes you see the beauty of life. That is what I understand as visionary poetry. Visionary poet would be the English Romantics, W.B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot, Kathleen Ryan, and God bless, in 50 years we will say Gil Decker as well. The aim of this presentation is to show the development in my PhD through the film. So I want to show you how the film helped me to develop my PhD. The first thing that I have noticed when I started this PhD is that poetic experiences outline everyday reality, but they also, at the same time, see something above the usual. Poetic experiences, that is, when a poet sees something, he describes it, but he also sees something deeper. So it's like two realities in the same place at the same time. So I drew to quantum physics, theory of relativity, because quantum physics tells you a lot about parallel realities. Parallel reality that exists here, the same place at the same time. Quantum physics describes the phenomenon on different levels. If you set your exam, your test from here, you will see electron as a particle. If you set your exam, your test from here, you see the same electron as a wave. That's the same element behaving completely differently, depending on the test, on how you set your test, which is perhaps how the poets see different realities. So I made a short film called Quantum Walls. In this film you'll see an example of my poetry.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Amen.
Borei shamayim v'ha'arei.
Okay, so that was the first year. I'm sorry I have to stop it there. That was my first year, which is the quest for science. My first year, trying to understand through quantum physics the poetic experience. I then published my article as well on the same issues. But the problem is that quantum physics, science, explain something, but they do not explain the process of the poet. They will tell you about parallel reality, but they will not tell you about the process of the poet himself. So what I did, I drew to psychology. The great master Carl Jung, Abraham Maslow, Leonard Shengold, and I also include Rudolf Steiner here. I'm trying to understand what is the emotion that motivates the author to create. So from trying to understand the so-called parallel reality, the physics aspect of reality, I'm trying to draw back to the poet and understand what influenced the poet to create. Because there's emotional intensity for the beauty and fascination of life within the poet, so I observe, which tells us that there is something much more deeper than the reality that we see. The poet doesn't see just the flower or a sense of the beauty of the flower, but the poet actually trying to find the light, inspiration, emotional intelligence, whatever we call it, within the mundane, the reality. That's why sometimes they are defined as people who are building castles in the air, people who are not related to this reality, they imagine. I argue that it is not correct. So I have noticed that poets, they have a unique observation of the daily life. The poet is basically a keen observer of reality. The poet is an investigator of life within reality. So I made a film called Unfolding Heart. 4 minutes, feel free to write any comment. Poetry example as well in that film.
As I was walking on the street, suddenly I felt light in me and around me, as if someone pushed me above the water from deep within. I said, "God," he answered, "I'm not God, and any word limits me." "Oh well, Lord, I'm not your Lord, nor I am a peasant." I said, "I know I have all the good in the world, but how can I use it?" He said, "Play your life. I gave you a great game, so play with it."
Have you ever seen a serious flower? Does the atom ask the molecule who creates what? It does not. Instead, they just play together.
That film really tries to show that the poet can deduce, if you like, higher ring in the mundane everyday life, in the small things. So about this time in my research, I've observed there are 3 recurring elements in my own progress. One, there's always nature in my work. The other, there's always inner look in my work. And the third thing, there's always stopping. In my film, there's always still frames. You would expect a movie to constantly move. I say, no, you have to stop and look on my still frame. Let's see what Wordsworth tells about stoppage, about the idea of stopping. "I would stand beneath some rock, listening to the sound that are the ghostly language of the ancient earth, or make them dim a daub in distant winds. Thence did I drink the visionary power." That's Wordsworth in his Prelude 1805. This stanza begins with, "I would stand." Very simple. I would stand could mean 2 things. One, it could mean that you stop physically, but it can also mean that you stop with your mind. You simply let go of that thought which is constantly running. You know, I have constant thought all the time. Try to stop. That's what the poet does. This idea of stoppage, if you just stop, it shows that anyone can become a poet. In other words, to become a poet, all you need to do is not to be born a poet, but simply to stop, listen to your heart, and watch reality not through your eyes, but through your heart. So if everyone can become a poet, I said, well, the next thing to do is actually ask, what does it mean to be a poet? How does the poet inspire us? And I made a film called Interview with Authorial Self, where the poet in that film interviewed his own muse, his own source of creativity, and asked that question. How does this work? How does inspiration flow to me?
I'm honored to introduce my own authorial self. Thank you very much for joining us. You're welcome. The authorial self is my own higher creative self, that which inspires me to write poetry. I would like to thank you very much for descending from the so-called collective unconsciousness, the spirit world, and coming here today. You see, it is more like coming down with an elevator from your higher mind and down to your heart. When I come to produce poetry, you inspire me to write my poems. In fact, you receive groups of acknowledgements from various sources. Why do you inspire me to write poetry?
So this film is actually a confrontation between the so-called academic self and the creative, inspiring self. It's one personality split into 2 levels of that personality in this film. I subject myself as a case study for this research. So the method that I'm using is to draw on my own personal experience. Why? Not just because I'm a case study so everybody can give feedback on it, because also with my personal experience I can tackle that experience as it happened. When I walk down the street and I have a poetic experience, I know it's there because I feel it. I can capture it as it happened. I don't have to bring it into a laboratory, which is not the natural place of poet. I don't have to ask that poet to go there and then ask him a questionnaire of question. On the contrary, I just do it as I live, as I go, as a poet. It also enabled me to have a deeper understanding of how does it work. You don't have to read what someone else wrote about another poet. I also interview other poets in Britain and trying to understand how this process works for them. And of course, William Blake reading bibliographies of other poets. Okay, thank you very much. It's very useful.